The air on Kepler 442b was a gritty haze, thick with the stench of scorched metal and the alien dust that coated everything like a second skin. It stung Private Elias Kane's eyes as he crouched behind a jagged outcrop, his pulse rifle humming. Softly in his gloved hands, its faint blue glow the only light in the pre-dawn gloom. The colony was a wasteland now, its once thriving domes reduced to skeletal husks by the Xytherian invasion. Outpost Delta, where Elias had spent the last 6 months scavenging for scraps of food, ammo, and hope, was little more than a graveyard of twisted steel and shattered dreams. His squad was gone, vaporized in a single blinding plasma strike 3 weeks ago. All he had left was Ghost, the wiry, battle-scarred mutt who'd been with him since Earth, now standing rigid at his side, ears twitching like antennas. Ghost's low growl cut through the keening wind, a sound so primal it sent a shiver down Elias's spine. The dog's amber eyes were locked on a shadowed ravine 100 meters away, his hackles raised, body taut as a bowstring. "What is it, boy?" Elias whispered, his voice barely a breath, swallowed by the desolation around them. Ghost didn't move, didn't bark, just stared, unblinking into the dark, his nose twitching as if parsing some scent Elias couldn't detect. Then, without warning, the dog bolted, his lean frame darting across the cracked ochre ground toward the ravine, ignoring Elias's hissed command to stay. "Damn it, Ghost!" Elias's heart slammed against his ribs as he scrambled after him, boots crunching on the brittle alien soil. The rifle felt heavier now, its weight a reminder of the stakes. The Xytherians were out there, silent, ruthless, their bioluminescent, bodies slipping through the shadows like ghosts of their own. One wrong move, and he'd be another casualty, another name scratched off a list no one would ever read. But Ghost was all he had, and he'd be damned if he'd let the dog run headlong into a trap. The ravine was a gash in the planet's surface, its walls jagged with crystalline deposits that glinted faintly under Kepler's twin moons. Elias slowed as he approached, his breath ragged, the cold air searing his lungs. Ghost stood at the edge of a shallow depression, his growl replaced by a soft whine, his tail flicking nervously. Elias dropped to a crouch, scanning the darkness, his rifle's scope painting the world in shades of green and gray. Then he saw it, a crumpled figure, half buried in the dirt, its bioluminescent skin flickering like a dying firefly. A Xytherian soldier. Elias's blood ran cold. The alien's 4 arms were splayed awkwardly, one clutching a jagged wound across its torso, oozing violet blood that pooled in the dust. Its mandibles twitched faintly, and its glassy, multifaceted eyes caught the moonlight, reflecting a fractured version of Elias's own silhouette. He raised his rifle, finger hovering over the trigger, his pulse a deafening roar in his ears. One shot. One clean shot. And this thing, this monster responsible for the slaughter of his squad, his friends, his entire goddamn world, would be gone. But Ghost moved first. The dog stepped forward, nudging the Xytherian's limp hand with his nose, his whine growing softer, almost plaintive. He looked back at Elias, those amber eyes glowing with an intensity that made Elias's chest tighten. "You're kidding me," he muttered, his voice rough with disbelief. The rifle stayed up, but his grip wavered. Ghost sat beside the alien, his body relaxed but alert, as if daring Elias to see what he saw. The Xytherian's eyes shifted, locking onto Elias, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the 3 of them, man, dog, and enemy, bound by something Elias couldn't name. He should shoot. Every fiber of his being screamed it. The Xytherians had come without warning, their sleek insectoid ships raining fire on the colony before anyone could even scream. Elias had watched his best friend, Corporal Lena Marquez, burn alive in a plasma blast, her laughter replaced by a silence that still haunted his dreams. This thing, this wounded soldier, was one of them. Yet Ghost's steady gaze held him back, those eyes carrying a weight that felt like judgment. The alien's mandibles clicked weakly, and Elias flinched, his finger tightening on the trigger. But Ghost didn't move, didn't growl, just sat there, his tail brushing the dirt. Elias's mind raced, torn between instinct and something deeper, something he'd buried under layers of rage and grief. He lowered the rifle a fraction, his hands trembling. "What the hell am I doing?" he whispered, more to himself than to Ghost. The Xytherian's chest heaved, its breathing shallow, each gasp accompanied by a faint, bioluminescent pulse. Elias's eyes darted to the wound, deep, ragged, probably from shrapnel. He didn't know Xytherian biology, didn't know if they could even feel pain the way humans did, but those eyes, huge, glassy, and impossibly alive, held something universal. Fear, desperation, a plea for something Elias wasn't sure he could give. He slung the rifle over his shoulder and dropped to his knees, his medkit clattering to the ground. Ghost's ears perked up, his head tilting as Elias fumbled with the kit's latches. "Don't make me regret this, boy," he muttered, glancing at the dog. Ghost's tail gave a single deliberate wag, as if to say, "I know what I'm doing." Elias's hands shook as he pulled out a canister of clotting gel, its label worn and smudged from months of disuse. He had no idea if it would work on alien physiology, but it was all he had. The Xytherian's eyes followed his every move, unblinking, its mandibles still clicking faintly. Elias hesitated, his mind screaming that this was insanity, that he was betraying everything he'd fought for. But Ghost's presence was a tether, grounding him, pulling him back from the edge of vengeance. He pressed the gel into the wound, the violet blood mixing with the clear, viscous substance. The alien flinched, a low, guttural sound escaping its throat, but it didn't resist. Elias worked quickly, his hands steadying as muscle memory took over. He'd patched up soldiers before, human soldiers, but this was different. The Xytherian skin was cool, almost metallic, its texture alien under his gloved fingers. He wrapped a compression bandage around the torso, improvising as best he could, and sat back, wiping sweat from his brow. The alien's breathing steadied, its bioluminescence pulsing brighter, more rhythmic. Elias exhaled, his chest tight with a mix of relief and dread. What now? He couldn't take it prisoner. Not out here. Not alone. And letting it go felt like signing his own death warrant. Ghost, sensing his turmoil, nudged his hand, warm and solid against his knuckles. Then the Xytherian spoke. Its voice was a rasping, clicking cascade, like wind chimes caught in a storm. Elias's translator, a battered earpiece he hadn't used in weeks, crackled to life. "Why, help?" The words were halting, strained, but unmistakable. Elias froze, his hands still sticky with violet blood. He stared at the alien, its eyes searching his face. And for the first time, he saw it not as a monster, but as something alive, something capable of thought, of fear. "I don't know," Elias admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at Ghost, who hadn't moved from the alien's side. "Because he trusts you." The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. The Xytherian's mandibles twitched, and it reached out, one trembling arm brushing against Ghost's fur. The dog didn't flinch, didn't growl, just sat there, steady as a rock. The alien's touch lingered, almost reverent, before its arm fell back to the dirt. Elias's mind was a storm of conflicting instincts. Every lesson from basic training, every scar on his body, screamed that this was a mistake. The Xytherians weren't human. They didn't think like humans, didn't feel like humans. Yet here was this one, bleeding and broken, looking at him with something that felt dangerously close to gratitude, And Ghost, damn him, had known it from the start. Hours passed, the twin moons sinking toward the horizon. Elias sat against a boulder, Ghost curled at his feet, the Xytherian lying still in the ravine. He'd given it water from his canteen, trickling it over its mandibles, hoping it could even drink like that. The alien's pulses grew stronger, its wound no longer seeping. Elias didn't know if it would live, but he'd done what he could. Now he just watched, his rifle across his lap, his thoughts a tangled mess. The Xytherian stirred as the sky began to lighten, its bioluminescence dimming in the faint dawn. It raised its head, slow and deliberate, and met Elias's gaze. Then, with effort, it reached into a pouch on its armor, pulling out a small metallic data chip that glinted in the weak light. It extended the chip toward Elias, its movements careful, almost submissive. Elias hesitated, his hand hovering over his rifle before reaching out to take it. "What's this?" he asked, his voice rough with suspicion. The alien's translator crackled again. "Coordinates. Outpost. Hours." Elias's blood ran cold. A Xytherian outpost? Was this a trap, a lure to draw him into an ambush? Or was it something else? Something Ghost had seen in those glassy eyes? The alien's arm fell back, exhausted, and it whispered, "End. War." Elias stared at the chip, its surface cool against his palm. Coordinates to a Xytherian outpost could mean intel, troop movements, weapon caches, maybe even a way to strike back. Or it could mean death, a final betrayal to seal his fate. He looked at Ghost, who was watching him with those same steady eyes, unflinching, unwavering. The dog had led him here, to this moment, to this choice. The Xytherian struggled to its feet, leaning heavily against the ravine wall. Elias didn't stop it. He couldn't. It limped into the shadows, its bioluminescence fading into the dawn, leaving Elias alone with Ghost and the weight of the chip in his hand. He turned it over, his mind racing. Salvation or trap? Vengeance or hope? The wind howled across the plains, carrying the distant whine of Xytherian ships. Ghost's ears perked up, his body tensing as he scanned the horizon. Elias stood, slipping the chip into his pocket. "Let's go, boy," he said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. Whatever came next, victory, betrayal, or something else entirely. It started with a dog who'd seen something worth saving in an enemy's eyes. And for the first time since the war began, Elias felt the faintest spark of something he'd thought was lost forever. Purpose.